Hello and welcome to Woman with Bunny Ears, a Twin Peaks podcast, Season 2, Episode 2, where we will be discussing At the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft, with some reference to other works of H.P. Lovecraft. This is an unusual episode because, first of all, it includes an excerpt from the previous episode, which veered into this topic. And second of all, the recording was lost, and so I have had to cobble it together from local recordings of my co-podcasters. My audio is not available, but they say some pretty interesting things, so I thought it would still be good to put this out. And the people joining me for this episode per se were Jason, the Sultan of Swing, and Kulak. I hope you enjoy, even though it's even rougher than most of our rough recordings here.
Meanwhile, I'm just over here with Junji Ito, drawing spirals.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the Uzumaki anime
thinking of-
adaptation comes out this October. It's
Yes.
looking pretty good.
I still want an At the Mountains of Madness adaptation. It's a craw in my cackles that we are getting a Uzumaki adaptation before we are getting an At the Mountains of Madness adaptation. We are adapting the 10,000 Lovecraftian work before we are adapting the most iconic Lovecraftian work.
Wouldn't that be Call of Cthulhu though, or Shadow over Innsmouth?
Shadow
That's
over
better.
It's probably the iconic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Shadow
it's been
over
adapted a bunch of
Innsmouth
times.
and At the Mountains of Madness are the two, but At the Mountains of Madness is the one that's like the biggest, most awe-inspiring story that like everyone wanted adapted and hasn't been.
Wait a minute.
Well-
I've read At the Mountains of Madness, and they literally just go to some mountains. It's not
There's
that
madness.
awe-inspiring.
And they come
I
back.
mean,
I know.
they go mad, but that's just because that's how Lovecraft liked to write things. They basically just find some spooky animals.
They find an entire civilization. Like things keep just getting bigger and bigger. It's Lovecraft's Uzumaki, where it's like, oh, this is messed up. Oh, this is messed up. How big could this thing get? What? Ancient aliens? What? Oh, giant penguins? Oh, there are tunnels everywhere. Oh, there's all this huge stuff, and there's this huger thing even beyond this that these people were afraid of and had to flee. What? Oh, we're getting out of here. We're getting out of here. And then the one guy turns around and the clouds clear and he can see the mountain that the people at the Mountains of Madness were afraid of, and he screams. And
Do you
And it
think that
ends-
when Columbus came to America, half of his men immediately went mad, learning that there was an entire continent there full of people? I'm just saying.
They did go mad, but they went mad torturing and raping the natives. So
They
like
went mad from syphilis-related
Exactly.
mental deterioration.
Don't forget the scurvy.
There may have been some airborne syphilis at the Mountains of Madness that would have explained things. Yeah.
Well, the
I mean,
real
it's a nice
reason we're
story.
never going to get a Mountains of Madness movie or TV series or anime
It's because nothing
because-
happens in it. Anyhow.
Guillermo
is
del
because they
Toro's
don't want us
adaptation.
to know the truth about Antarctica. They don't want to let us
Oh, true.
know why the international treaties effectively block you from having your own expedition there.
Have you been
Yeah.
hanging out on SCP forums?
Maybe.
Maybe, but no, if you look it up, like pretty much every government in the world is like, yeah, no, you can do it. You just have to get approval from us and every other government that's a signatory to the treaty. And there are 10 dozen agencies that can say no for no reason and you have no appeal. But sure, you can totally do it.
It sounds like you tried to go to Antarctica at one point for one of your terrorist schemes, and then you got denied, and now you're mad.
Yeah. Angry because they won't let you blow up the South Pole, huh?
No, if I wanted to go, I would charter it from India. I would take it from India because India is like far enough south that you can just cross the Indian Ocean, but it's not a signatory to the treaty.
Got 'em.
I love how clearly you've thought about this.
All the snow you can eat.
Anyway, Evangelion.
Yeah, Evangelion.
Yes,
Yeah.
What?
at the mountains of Ava.
Just going to be recording a
Hello.
podcast for a bit here, if that's okay. That.
Chirp, 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 chirp. Give me fish. Give me fish. Oh, what isn't there to talk about? One of the greatest short stories ever. Certainly of the 20th century. Lovecraft he both summarizes like every scientific development up till 1930 at that point. Like you get him his loving descriptions of early like core boring techniques that would become the basis of pretty much all Antarctic research and Arctic research. You have this wonderful catalog of how expeditionary technology had developed to that point. You have all these references hidden in there, like the mountains themselves are named after the Erebus and Terror. This guy researched the hell out of everything to do with Arctic expeditions, and then he does it to tell horror work about pretty much the entire direction he sees scientific development go into. We are forever poor because Lovecraft did not live to see World War II and to comment on the human man-made horrors beyond comprehension. Every element of his work seems to anticipate the atomic bomb. Like, he understands that scientists are doing something that eventually they're going to discover something horrifying that could end the world and just rip humanity apart. Like, he understood better than anyone who's probably ever lived, like maybe even the scientists themselves, the implication of being able to discover these microscopic phenomena, these weird relationships between space and time that you can only measure at the microscopic level. And he just intuitively understood that if you're discovering weirdness at that level, like, you're going to be able to rip apart the universe at some point. You're going to unleash something beyond comprehension if you're discovering things beyond comprehension.
Sounds a lot like Kiss Me Deadly.
Honestly,
Deeply Lovecraftian film.
Honestly, I'd say I probably preferred a lot of Lovecraft's other short fiction to this.
What makes you say that?
On a opposition note, well, I would say that Lovecraft, love him or hate him, has some very noticeable habits in his writing. One of the less objectionable ones is how florid his prose is, but he has a tendency to get carried away when it comes to long-winded descriptions of a scene. And to me, At the Mountains of Madness was maybe 60% long-winded descriptions of a scene. I suppose it can be argued that that's largely the point, but to me, I would say that around the fifth or sixth consecutive paragraph about the weird hexagonal shape of the building turrets and it's an architecture that's completely unlike something that we humans have seen. And so it's so completely unlike it that I really have to do my best to describe it from the ground up, leaving no detail unspared. That is noticeable in a lot of his work, but I would say it is probably at its most noticeable in At the Mountains of Madness.
Yeah, I mean that seems necessary for something where it's so alien. Like if you're describing anything in prose, there's a quote I like on like nouns that says, if you're using a noun, if your reader doesn't know it, then you can't do business with them. You're referring to something that's already instantiated in the reader's memory and then calling on it and arranging it in a certain way that they can refer to. So if you have something utterly weird, that we have no basis of imitation to describe it from, and in this case he's sort of very self-consciously trying to make sure he's not lapsing into any kind of existing patterns or like rederivating the Egyptians or some kind of exotic civilization we already have. Then in that case, you would have to describe it from the details up, because we would just have no other way to comprehend it, is we would have to dissect it like a scientist and then just see it like as it is, like, oh, this does that, because we don't know its social functions or kind of any of the little heuristics we would use to compress that information. It's just not in our memories. Bloodborne, baby.
Well, that's kind of the magic of it. Like, this is an epistolary story. It's not a third person narration. It's a second person narration. The work you're reading is a document in the world you're reading about. It's written as if from this perspective of one of these scientists actually trying to persuade you, another scientist, of something. You see this in other works like Frankenstein. Frankenstein is kind of written this way. Dracula is written as a series of letters, but this work, writing it as a long-winded scientific piece, all those details get us into the mindset of the character, and that tone of voice of scientists explaining something to what he perceives to be the next scientist has become such a staple of the horror genre. Like, you cannot play a video game now without encountering that exact mode of voice, either through video logs or audio logs or some other form of document, just papers within the video game world. That style has so permeated everything related to the horror genre, partly because of this work. also, I think a lot of the painstakingness of it, it's both for the tone, but also it's a bit more exhaustive than we expect, because this is all still new at this point. Like, no one's read a story like this before. If they have, they've read Lovecraft, but he hasn't even written a story like this before. So the entire scientist describing something unknowable or unreal, we're used to having it chopped down to just the good details and then it fragments off or whatever, but this is a complete document he's producing in world, and the comprehensiveness adds to it. The fact that there's a date for everything that happened, the fact that he alludes to, I think I should have looked this up, but he alludes to a lot of expeditions that really happened and details that were exact for that exact time period. That if you're reading this in 1932, it's very possible you could have come away convinced that what you had read was a real document, just from how comprehensive the style is.
Yeah, it is interesting as to its playing into Antarctica being particularly, even still at that point, unknown. Fun fact is that the continent of Antarctica wasn't actually discovered until 1820. I'm sure they knew that there was ice down there, but it wasn't until 1820 that they discovered that it was a proper continent with land and everything. No. See, that's Greenland. And Iceland is green.
No, it's interesting to consider that Lovecraft's kind of coming off a century of discovery, and it's still kind of undiscovered. As I said, he mentions the Erebus and Terror, the two British scientific ships that disappeared into the Canadian Arctic, searching for the Northwest Passage around 1840 or so. That's, at the time of his writing, that isn't quite recent memory, but stuff like that. The Shackleton expedition happened during the 1910s when Ernest Shackleton, his expedition got ice locked down in Antarctica during the winter, and their ships got crushed in the ice, so they had to do, I think it was a months-long, maybe 6 months long expedition across the length of Antarctica, hauling their lifeboats with them, and then chart a course with their lifeboats to I think it was Elephant Island or St. George Island, just south of South America, to get rescue for the remainder of their crew that had to sit behind eating their sled dogs on the Antarctic shore, wondering if anyone was ever going to come for them.
Yes, but what might they have saw, or rather overlooked, up there?
Well, it's kind of funny because Lovecraft's storytelling, like at the Mountains of Madness, is so influential that his telling of this tale goes back and influences the tales that came before him. So, of course, the story of the Erebus and Terror and the Doomed Franklin expedition gets reinterpreted as the novel The Terror, and then the TV series The Terror, which they purposely make Lovecraftian. And then there's the Shackleton. It has a happy ending and everyone lives, but still there's a really intense amount of...
Can you spoil historical events?
Rome falls. I'm sorry, guys. Spoiler
Oh God!
alert.
Don't remind me they
Caesar
killed him.
doesn't live.
At 2
We're
Kulak.
recording on the Ides March. But yeah, if you watch like the Kenneth Branagh miniseries, The Terror, there's a lot of kind of subtle Lovecraftian influences that wheel their way in because he's so redefined what Antarctic expedition is in our imagination. The cold, the alien, even though there aren't aliens or anything, you still see his influence on pretty much any story set in the Antarctic. The most famous Antarctic movie, The Thing, is entirely an homage to At the Mountains of Madness. You see just his influence wheedle out. He's really defined how we imagine polar regions at this point. Yeah, that strange bird has just stuck in the imagination. For mind you, their budget usually doesn't allow for a full 6-foot one. Usually doesn't even allow for white paint.
All dressed up, but they've got nowhere to go. Well, since Kulak's talked so long about the framing of the story, the sort of scientific concept of it, I'd say it's it's interesting in that of all the Lovecraft stories I've read, I'd say this is the only one that has an outright investigation as its premise, as opposed to just something. Actually, strike that. I believe the Statement of Randolph Carter also had an investigation, but an archaeological one instead of a scientific one. But hey, this scientific expedition at the Mountains of Madness really just turns into an archaeological one by accident, wouldn't you say? Yep.
Yeah, there are a few, like, a lot of Lovecraft's shorter stories do have the investigator trope, so, Rats in the Walls, he's investigating why there are rats in his walls. Call of Cthulhu is, like, classic Lovecraftian investigation story, the great Lovecraftian investigation story, but, like...
Yeah, but it's a little bit more of, like, a mystery, like a personal investigation as opposed to any sort of expedition. Same with, say, like The Shadow over Innsmouth. It's like somebody decides to investigate this town because of this weird art piece, but isn't really prepared for what he discovers. Really could.
Well, no one's ever prepared for what they discover in a Lovecraft story. Like, that's the essence of the story. You start investigating it. You start investigating, and there's nothing you could have done to be prepared. That's what... one of the great kind of Lovecraft spin-off universes, kind of a spin-off of Call of Cthulhu, Delta Green, is about pretty much it's the X-Files meets Men in Black, but Lovecraft. So it's a government department that deals with like Lovecraftian messed up stuff, and the setup is they're always under budget, and they've been disbanded a few times and stuff, but there's not under budget. Sorry, had their budgets underfunded. Yes, had their budget cut. occasionally disbanded, so it's just like 5 old timers who are oath bound that like they'll show up for it and stuff. And it's wonderful because you have this setup that it's like the force of the U.S. government in a way, and occasionally you'll have a story where it's just actually the full force of the U.S. government, the same way Shadow over Innsmouth ends with like a submarine torpedoing the entire town or a battleship bombarding it. And yet even the U.S. government, when they show up, they're always unprepared. Like, the investigators don't survive. Things go to hell because that's the essence of the Cthulhu mythos. Nothing you can throw at it is going to be big enough. You will never be prepared.
What about the alert in Call of Cthulhu?
You're going to have to remind me of that. You're going to have to remind me of that one. I can't recall specifically all the events in Call of Cthulhu.
If you don't mind me more or less spoiling the ending of Call of Cthulhu.
Oh, I've read it. It was just like 10 years ago. It's blended with 3 other Lovecraft stories for me.
Yeah. Well, perhaps I'll leave that unsaid.
It's a 100-year-old story. Let him
then.
spoil it. Come on.
Well, I imagine that even if I did say it, that Flashy would probably edit it out of the episode. But in any case, I feel like the unconquerable part of a lot of the Cthulhu mythos monsters was maybe something largely added to after the fact. But what seems unconquerable in Lovecraft itself is the madness that will befall you when you learn of the horrid things that lurk beyond imagining.
Well, yeah, that's like you can kill most individual things in Lovecraft that you'd encounter, like a Shoggoth. You could dynamite or artillery strike or whatever. It's not that the creature is unkillable. It's that what the creature represents is unstoppable. Like the madness of the universe, the fact that you're a small dot on the edge of everything, the fact that you might be. I don't think Lovecraft ever did this, but a lot of post-Lovecraftian works did this. The fact that you might be riddled with cancer or whatever from the phenomena you encounter. Like, it's not that the thing that has an intelligence that's undefeatable. It's that the mystery, the unknown, the raw indifference of the universe will never not be there. You might take out the cult in the middle of the Louisiana swamp, but whatever they were doing has still been done.
Yeah.
Well, Lovecraft's work, I always interpreted most of Lovecraft's work as a metaphor for industrialized warfare. So a lot of his original stories, a lot of his original like poetry and stuff was written in 1910s. He has a poem, The Conscript, that's basically a Lovecraft short story, but instead of it being about, oh, I went mad from all the spookiness, it's I went mad from being drafted into World War One, and that's kind of the essence of it. He uses like these spooky alien monsters and stuff, and these concepts that's like, oh, I finally understood staring on those mountains of madness that we were a small dot in a sea of black infinity. But the kind of the thing that most approximated that the alien horror wasn't something out there in the world, well, it was in the world, but it wasn't like in Antarctica. It was what happened the second civilization had a slight crack in it. In France and Germany were at war, and like I said, the kind of apocalyptic vision of what science might unleash and what secrets might be hidden if you just start studying these small, unusual phenomena a bit too closely was fully realized in 45 with the dropping of the atomic bombs. Well, I mean,
Indeed.
the artilleryman doesn't pay much mind to where the shell lands. Nor does the VA bureaucrat care very much about the procedure denied. In a very abstract way, he cares that it lands where he wants it to land. He doesn't spend his day visualizing it landing and the impact that shrapnel across a 20-meter distance has on human beings.
So, what's everybody's here's experience with Lovecraft, and at what
I fucked him.
point in that did they come around to reading At the Mountains of Madness?
Yeah.
What was that, Jason? You fucked him?
No.
Was he
Yes.
lovely?
Their pornos stop having budgets. They stop even bothering to act.
They stop bothering to balance the deficit. They start thinking that just because they've got the reserve currency, nothing can go wrong.
Go years without even pretending to pass a budget. Stop building new skyscrapers.
Really, I think. So really, what did the Elder Things in was their fiscal irresponsibility. Milton Friedman? Yeah, I mean...
If only they elected Starfish Paul. I've just got a quick run and grab my power cord. Be back in a few minutes.
But, Flashy, what was your experience with Lovecraft before and after reading At the Mountains of Madness? Oh, yeah? One of his most famous, anyway. Had you read much else by Lovecraft prior to this? Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, they tend to be enjoyable even when they're not Cthulhu, and they also tend to be enjoyable even when they're not strictly good, so to speak. But yeah.
Could you repeat
Oh,
the
yeah.
question, Splashy?
Well, it was more or less my question. Yeah, and my question was just posed to everybody, although, well, Jason, of course, fucked him, but Kulak, what was your experience with Lovecraft before and after reading At the Mountains of Madness?
So, let me think. I've watched so many horror movies that like Lovecraft's influence was really kind of in the water for me. So let's see. There are always the I suppose that is the case. So one of the first Lovecraft stories I read was Rats in the Walls, which is a great just introduction.
Rats in the Walls, did you say?
Yeah, Rats in the Walls. Just a great introduction to Lovecraft. It's like 7 pages. All of Lovecraft is online.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, he's public domain for our listeners at home. You can read him all of him right now. But he has no heirs to fight for his.
Yes. He hasn't got an estate. It is focused on keeping the rights to his stories tied up so that they can continue to rake in the money.
So
Daily
yeah,
episode
Rats
on
in the
copyright
Wall
forthcoming.
was really the first one I read, which is just an amazing short story. The twist of what the rats truly are is just wonderfully executed in that story, and the pulling back of the veil of time is wonderful. Music of Eric Zahn is also another great Lovecraft story. The revelation at the end that he couldn't find the apartment again. He couldn't even find the street it was on. Indeed, even the neighborhood of town that he had lived in didn't seem to appear on maps anymore. It's just one of the perfect endings to any short story. So those were the kind of literary introduction to Lovecraft. Obviously, if you play any video games at all, you've been introduced to him in a dozen ways. Darkest Dungeon is a crazy fun game with a crazy fun tone, and June's voice is just forever in the back of your head after that. The films of Stuart Gordon are just wonderful fun. Reanimator, Castle Freak, Dagon are all kind of wonderful, cheesy 80s adaptations of Lovecraft that all are very thematically unique. Right now, there's The Color Out of Space, the movie with Nick Cage, which is wonderful, and there's quite a few movies based on Lovecraft being made now. Richard Stanley and Nick Cage are supposedly working on the Dunwich Horror, which I'm really looking forward to. And of course, if you've ever just even read Stephen King, he takes a lot of influence from Lovecraft, although all his mythos work and his, it was this alien horror never quite works in Stephen King. The revelation that it was a spider monster who's also an alien is just one of the worst executed things in all of literature. But no, Lovecraft, if you read him, you will be instantly feeling familiarity with him.
Yeah, on your point about Lovecraft adaptations, I feel that oftentimes in that case, some of the best adaptations of his work are the ones that aren't explicitly adaptations of him, but are still obviously based on Lovecraftian ideas. Like Alien, for instance. Alien has a lot in common with At the Mountains of Madness, as does The Thing, for instance. Complete with the Antarctica setting.
The Thing is just a top 10 movie of all time. It's the movie John Carpenter was born to make, and that man made great movies.
Yeah. Also, the somewhat recent movie Oblivion is a quite good adaptation of The Color Out of Space. Can't quite compare it to the Nick Cage one because I haven't actually seen that adaptation. But yeah, I say a lot of them aren't explicitly based on H.P. Lovecraft. I did just see Reanimator last night. That's excellent as well.
That ending.
And that is yeah, not really the same ending as the short story, but I guess to answer my own question on the background I've had with Lovecraft, I first came upon him in like just an omnibus edition that I picked up and read into that, like the Statement of Randolph Carter, The Outsider. I would echo Kulak's takes on all that as being really great suspenseful short stories with like the perfect final line twist, the lurking horror as well in that regard. But I sort of didn't get into his, I guess, A-list, so to speak, work until much later, and read like all the stories that are always mentioned in conjunction with his name, The Color Out of Space, The Shadow over Innsmouth, Call of Cthulhu, and this. And I think At the Mountains of Madness I read last, and got a bit tired of it with its lack of brevity compared to a lot of other things that he did. Like you mentioned, Rats in the Walls being about 7 pages, whereas I think At the Mountains of Madness was probably around 100 pages at least, like a novella at the very least.
My hardcover is 70 pages. So.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it depends on the size of the print anyway.
I think it's best appreciated like just sitting in a dark room by yourself, and it's just long enough to like read in one sitting, but it's not so quick that you're done in a couple minutes, and you really just kind of get drawn to the frame of it. It makes you feel like you're there. The imagery really sticks with you.
I could imagine how going for walks in the snow and listening to it would just be an amazing experience. if you ever have to do a long drive in the snow, like multi-hours to get somewhere, that would be a very good short story to listen to for that trip. In case you have to, I don't know, hump it across the prairies
I
or
feel like Kulak would
the
just walk the
Midwest
entirety
in
of the
winter.
I feel like Flashy would just walk the entirety of the Midwest instead.
You're an avid walker, Falashi.
He never stops.
Yeah. By the way, just have to go back and correct myself on one point. I gave the name of the film as Oblivion. It's actually Annihilation. Got my synonyms confused. Oblivion is just the Elder Scrolls game, or like the Tom Cruise sci-fi movie or something.
Well, the Elder Scrolls do drive you mad when you read them, and then you just kind of shriek a bunch of nonsense. It's a pretty similar concept.
Like
The
start to
Daedric
shriek
princes
nonsense like
definitely have a
mud crabs.
Lovecraft.
Terrible creatures. I avoid them whenever I can.
I love the visual of the scientist looking off in the distance and seeing a mirage or like what looks like a distinctive cloud formation. Like, wow, that looks like an impossible castle or something. And having it be that, oh my god, it is that thing. Because I think we've all had that experience like, wow, that looks like a mountain range, that cloud formation. Whoa. Or like just seeing something beyond the horizon, like in a mirage. And so I've never encountered that done in another like short story or medium where it's like, whoa, that impossible visual that like you get around the horizon, like it was real. What?
The Necronomicon, like written by the mad Arab. I forget his name.
Whoa,
Yeah.
don't dox him.
Whose real name is Abdul Al-Hazred.
Damn,
sorry,
son.
Sorry, you see.
Yassine's name?
There's actually a good in-universe reason for that, though. That as well.
I patched his plot hole.
The reason, so there are all these references to various artworks, like, oh, this reminds me of this Japanese work, which was really weird and distinctive. Oh, this suggested this work by this modernist painter, and it's that the old ones, it's established like the artistically sensitive and like those kind of on the edge of like normal perception, they'll peer in dreams to them, and they'll have visions of the old ones in their bizarre dreamlike realm, and that inspires the art. They become obsessed with creating it. So the Necronomicon is only one of the more famous works ever produced like this, and it's like, oh, this is terrible and horrifying and weirdly degenerate, this thing that the Mad Arab produced and then was executed for. Oh, that's such a weird artifact. But if you happen to go to school at the University of Arkham in Massachusetts, like oh, you gotta read it. And that's kind of why all Lovecraft stories are set around Arkham. both because he's obsessed with New England and only knows New England, but also because it's like, oh, these people have access to this bizarre text that no one else has access to, but everyone who kind of goes to school is always kind of tempted to read it. It's rumor shadowed and stuff. That's one of the big draws, and of course there are short stories where someone tries to break in and steal the Necronomicon and stuff. That's the Dunwich Horror that happens. I think there's a few others where similar things happen, but it's a recurring theme that either there's someone who's read the Necronomicon and that's kind of influencing their choice around it, or they're always seeing like, oh, this reminds me of this weird artwork, or Call of Cthulhu starts with him tracking down, like, him knowing an artist who dies and like encountering this weird work he produced, and then I can't remember the story exactly, but then something gets unearthed, like a weird archaeological artifact that's new, and it looks exactly like this artist's artwork, and there's no possible way for the two to look alike, so he winds up investigating that, and that leads him down the rabbit hole of, oh my god, there's elder things and all this stuff, and winds up going to Louisiana and discovering there's a swamp of, like, there's a cult who practice human sacrifice and stuff, and that's just like one minor plot point in the story of the Call of Cthulhu. Like, that's an episode in the story, because he's tracking down, like, oh, these weird images, and he keeps finding them over, and every time he pursues a thread, like, it's not random, it's portending some horrible doom. So that element of the Lovecraft mythos is very well explained and explored. It's one of the wonderful things about Lovecraft. He has, like, most, like, a good horror short story, you really only need like one or two themes to make it work. Like, you can tell a good short story with just like one really twisted or weird concept or one idea. And Lovecraft, all his stories have a dozen, and they're all interconnected, and you read a collection of his short stories and you see the themes stretch over it, so something that's like really subtle and like you wouldn't even notice in one story, you read another short story of his, it's like, oh wow, that explains this other thing that was happening in the other story, and whoa, that makes it even creepier. So the collected works of Lovecraft, like, each short story is pretty good, but reading multiple of his short stories just illuminates so much of the other ones. Yeah, honestly, he was the original proponent of, like, open source or no copyright storytelling, like the collaborative mode of storytelling. Not only is he not copyrighted or not for the purposes of the internet, he also, like, resisted the copyright instinct while he was alive. Like, no, copy my elements. Let on that our short stories are related, and of course all his friends, Robert E. Howard stories, which are sadly still guarded by the Howard estate. Like, there are even poems of Howard that you can't look up online. Like, you can't just go online and find the Ghost Kings or the Flit in the Window. I can't even remember the name of that one. Like, even his poems, you can't find them online. You need a collection because his estate is so awful. But Howard, he wrote in Lovecraft's universe, and Lovecraft borrowed from him as well. It was incredibly tragic when Robert E. Howard committed suicide. Like Lovecraft lost one of his best friends. You see it with other writers. So like the Cane Yellow is one of the great Lovecraftian stories that wasn't written by Lovecraft, but it was again in kind of that shared universe, and it's always interpreted as part of the Lovecraftian universe. So you get things like True Detective that incorporated, and other Lovecraftian elements. It's just like the shared universe of themes and characters and like horrors is so perfect with Lovecraftian storytelling, and he encouraged it from the beginning. He's kind of the original viral collaborative horror writer, the original SCP.
Yeah, part of your answer, like the way you were describing like the rumors around at the university, it reminded me of the way the rationalist community treats the writings of Moldbug. Not so much lately, but maybe like 4 or 5 years ago or something. It was kind of this this secret doctrine or something, and it was, oh, you've read this, and now it's kind of in the water supply, but it very much was spooky hidden knowledge.
Yeah, BAP was like that when he came out. It was kind of encouraged to view it as like this spooky thing, this self-published book no one had read in the style no one quite understood, that was inherently esoteric. You also see this with Nick Land's writing, or now Zero HP Lovecraft's short stories. That kind of encouragement of an ethos of a rumor shadowed figure on the internet.
I'm still trying to get...
no one's heard of, but now you have. And of course, I'm tapping into that now with a Narconomicon. Go read me at narconomicon.substack.
Yeah.
But
I'm still trying to get Yarvin
Born to Shill.
Asked him. I don't know. But now that you're mentioning it, I feel like it's like we should get some of those other guys on here, and then we already have you, so that's kind of nice.
it is not an achievement to get me. I will link Cthulhu, the song by Gunship. It has the wonderful excerpt from Call of Cthulhu at the beginning of the song.
I will say, when I introduced myself as a Shoggoth, probably should have gone for the whistling that they make. Is it Tekkalili, Tekkalili? Which I do wonder what kind of whistling really sounds like that, but unimaginable.
I love that detail, just the whistling, like the mad piping on the wind, because of course, like, nothing in the Arctic actually sounds like that, but you can imagine hearing that on the wind and just being like, oh, that has to be like some weird naturally occurring thing. But like, in the back of your mind, you just know, no, there's nothing that would sound like that. it makes a whistling sound, but like it doesn't make a piping sound. Like what's described is like a half musical element, whereas like if you ever live in an old house in the Midwest or whatever, the sound wind makes as it goes by cracks or rocks or whatever is like a very like it's a rising whistle, and then it falls exactly like you emulated. Like there aren't patterns to it because it's just whatever random amount of pressure the wind manages to push by it.
It's also possible that he's just describing it in the same way as like birders' guides describe bird calls. Like the idea that a bird call is described as please, please, pleased to meet you. And I doubt that any bird actually sounds like that.
Chickadees sound exactly like chickadee. Like now that I've said
Yeah.
it, if you go out into the woods and you will hear it, and you'll hear that exact voice. Like,
yeah, I get that one at least, but it's like when people try to interpret actual words onto birdsong, like "whip poor Will." Like, you could maybe interpret that from just a series of tweets, but it would be a little bit of a stretch. I don't know. I mean,
Hmm. Nice. I'd like to read the conscript if you don't mind. It's pretty short. The Conscript by H.P.
Cthulhu
Lovecraft.
Fatagan.
I am a peaceful working man. I am not wise or strong, but I can follow nature's plan in labor, rest, and song. One day that men that rule us all decided we must die, else pride and freedom surely fall in the dim by and by. They told me I must write my name upon a scroll of death, that someday I should rise to fame by giving up my breath. I do not know what I have done that I should thus be bound to wait for tortures one by one, and then an unmarked mound. I hate no man, and yet they say that I must fight and kill, that I must suffer day by day to please a master's will. I used to have a conscience free, but now they bid it rest. They've made a number out of me, and I must ne'er protest. They tell of trenches long and deep, filled with the mangled slain. They talk till I can scarcely sleep, so reeling is my brain. They tell of filth and blood and woe, of things beyond belief, of things that make me tremble so with mingled fright and grief. I do not know what shall I do, is not the law unjust? I can't do what they want me to, and yet they say I must. Each day my doom doth nearer bring, each day the state prepares. Some day I feel a watching thing that stares and stares and stares. I seem never to sleep, my head whirls in the queerest way. Why am I chosen to be dead upon some fateful day? Yet hark, some fibres overwrought, a gidding whine I quaff. Things seem so odd I can do naught but laugh and laugh and laugh.
we live in a society.
I was gonna say, no, Kulak, that's a different movie.